Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review, and in this one I'm gonna review Ignore Grief by Xiu Xiu. Now Xiu Xiu is a project that is actually kinda hard to categorize. You can mostly call it a dark and grim experimental group, but obviously that's pretty vague because even when it comes to experimental music, they've gone into many different directions of sounds all over the years with a really big catalog and also with lots of lineup changes over the years. The main leading member after all of those years is Jamie Stewart. Apart from this, we have Angela Xiu, who has been in basically all of the recent stuff from like 2009 since today, and when it comes to the brand new album Ignore Grief, we also have a new member over here, Dave Kendrick, who when it comes to his role on this album, he is apparently on lyrics and percussion, so I don't know about the lyrics, but when it comes musically, it's not like I see a huge contribution into this album, considering that yeah, you have percussion moments, but it's not really an album that relies heavily on drums or percussion. So with this new lineup over here, we get a brand new album in which I was certainly excited to see the results because I really like the sound of Xiu Xiu, and I believe that over the years they actually have a pretty strong and consistent catalog for the most part. It is also a weird case of a project considering that despite their popularity, I find that their music is not really all that easy to get into, and that is something that I would actually say it implies for lots of albums they've put out, since I find their deliveries, the really obscure directions with structures and pacing, and this grim and horrifying atmosphere that they would create with their deliveries and all of the instrumentation, to be kinda challenging to really get into. So it's actually really cool to see that this group all over the years has done some stuff that have succeeded the way they have, and I feel that most of their recent stuff have actually been really fleshed out and some really well executed works. Now when it comes to their previous album Oh No, which was released 2 years ago, it was actually one of the few spots in their catalog for me that didn't really manage to hook me up all that much. It's an album that I find that it was interesting in terms of its concept, but apart from that, I don't believe that it was one of their better executed works. It was one that went into a few different directions that in my opinion didn't really work all that fascinatingly. And the thing is that Xiu Xiu have taken lots of risks over the years, and I believe that for the most part their results lead in success. When it comes to Ignore Grief, it seems that it goes into a darker and more horrifying direction when it comes to the sounds and the atmosphere, which is something that I do appreciate, and I believe that it makes for some of the strongest elements when it comes to the overall sound and aesthetic that Xiu Xiu tried to provide with her music. Though the overall concept of this album felt particularly strange, and not in a sense that actually intrigued me all that much. So you have the one half being sung by Jamie Stewart and the other half being sung by Angela Xiu. When it comes to the Jamie Stewart tracks, they are like experimental modern classical stuff, and when it comes to the Angela Xiu tracks, they go into a more industrial direction, which already creates a division and in my opinion a bit of an inconsistency, because when it comes to the more industrial stuff, you actually get some more engaging and powerful songs. They manage to be more chaotic and actually providing some of the better stuff out of this album in my opinion. On the other hand, when it comes to the more modern classical tracks, they seem to be a bit minimal, focusing more of like creating a bit of a horrifying atmosphere with some church organ stuff, and then you have all of those random portions just creating this absurd feel of randomly playing different notes, and it doesn't really feel like it leads to something all that much compelling. So I believe that while the album does sound dark and it does have some parts where I would say that it succeeds on creating this horrifying atmosphere, I'd say that this is not one of the most well executed albums when it comes to this regard, especially coming from Xiu Xiu, which are known for making some pretty dark and grim stuff all over the years in their catalog. This one feels like a bit of a failed experiment in my opinion. I wasn't really all that hooked with this concept, and I don't believe that it's executed all that properly. It feels more of like an album that tries to bring back some of the elements that we would see in some of their first albums, which definitely managed to be pretty chaotic and experimental, and definitely having some horrifying deliveries to them, but I believe that Ignore Grief is missing the mark on what made those first albums so engaging and so captivating in the first place. The randomness on so many of the parts over here just ends up making this whole thing sound even more confusing, and to the point where it just mostly leaves you with a sense of confusion rather than really managing to evoke this sense of uneasiness. That's not to say though that the instrumentals are bad. I'd say that this is one of the strongest elements when it comes to this particular album, and the mixing of Lawrence English is something that I truly admire, since I believe that he can do some really good stuff when it comes to mixing. However, the one complaint I'd say when it comes to the overall sound of this album comes with the vocals, as I'd say that in almost all of the tracks they sound way too low into the mix, and I believe that certain deliveries don't really shine over here, because certain vocals, especially when it comes to the Jimmy Stewart songs, are truly some of the stuff that would manage to create this sense of uneasiness, and having the vocals being so buried in the background and so low into the mix certainly takes away what I feel it's one of the strongest elements in order to make those tracks sound even more powerful and succeeding into creating this horror-esque feel. We start with a track into the Angela Xiu side of things with the Real Chaos Cha Cha Cha, which I'd say the title is appropriate in the sense that we're talking about a pretty chaotic song over here. I'd say that it's one of the better ideas when it comes to the pacing, and I like the way that it ends, having those isolated sounds and just giving the sense that the track just ended earlier but it keeps on going and providing some new sounds and directions which feel kinda surprising and make this track feel a little bit more engaging in certain aspects. Then we have the first track out of the Jimmy Stewart side of things with 666 Photos of Nothing, which in my opinion felt pretty underwhelming. It is quite inconsistent considering that it's nothing compared to what we heard with the previous track, and one that while it manages to create a dark atmosphere surrounding it, I don't believe that it was all that great in terms of its instrumentals or any of the ideas provided to it. The track Esquerita Little Richard is possibly one of my favorite moments over here, since it manages to be one of the most engaging tracks over here, having this more electro-industrial feel to it. There is a beat attached to it, and I like this more sinister tone that it creates, managing to be a little bit more dynamic and actually having a sense of direction, something that in my opinion misses with a lot of those songs. So in my opinion this feels like one of the more consistent and more well fleshed out ideas over here, something that in my opinion misses for a big portion out of this album. Like the next track, Maybe Baby, also goes into those more industrial directions, however it's such a chaotic and experimental and weird song to the point where all of this chaos just leads to nothing. It's just a track that in my opinion sort of feels like lost potential. There's just a bunch of ideas being thrown together, and in my opinion there could have been done a bit more to it, having a bit of a more sense of direction. The track Tercer is possibly one of the best when it comes to vocal deliveries, as I really like the passion out of the vocals from Jimmy Stewart on this one. Too bad I don't find the instrumental to be all that engaging, which I'd say it's also the case with the track Pahrump, one that tries to be a little bit more different when it comes to this more neoclassical directions, but in my opinion still feels somewhat lackluster and not really providing all that much to make for such a fulfilling experience. After this point I believe that we just get some decent tracks, but with not really that much to add to them. It's just short 3-minute tracks, and in my opinion it feels like there could have been done a bit more with those ideas to make them feel more fleshed out, but at the end of the day I just feel like we get some cool ideas being thrown here and there but not really making for fulfilling tracks. Actually, I'd say that my favorite moment by far to this album when it comes to the Jimmy Stewart side is the final track 4M. This for me actually feels like the best moment out of this album on managing to create a creepy and haunting atmosphere. It has this minimal side to it that in my opinion actually works pretty well over here. After the part where you have all of those disturbing vocals, you have those really minimal parts of classical instrumentation that are just building up, playing along, and really managing to keep this dark and unsettling tone without making something all that chaotic, all that unpredictable. It keeps this similar tone, and I like how this track ends up feeling more grounded and actually providing some of the most successful ideas over here, even in its 8-minute runtime. And while it doesn't have that many things going on to it, it doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome. Its minimalism really works. You get freed out of all of the chaos that was happening beforehand, so I believe that this makes for a really nice way to end this album. One that in my opinion was somewhat underwhelming, and I would prefer if it was executed a little bit better. That is not to say that this is a bad album. I believe that there are some really great stuff about it, but for Xiu Xiu standards, I find this to be one of my least favorite works out of them so far. I believe that they could have done a bit more out of this because they truly know how to make some dark and grim stuff, but even in its short runtime, there is a lot of randomness going on to it. It is a mess, and so I wouldn't suggest it as a strong first recommendation for those who wanna get into the sound of Xiu Xiu, which in my opinion for the most part have a pretty solid catalog. I'm gonna give Ignore Grief a 6- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.